When it comes to games released by NAS America, you can be sure of one thing. Every time you have to be prepared for mammoth adventures that rarely leave anything to chance. And the same applies to Trails of Azure. This is a big game that includes a broad narrative, countless cutscenes, turn-based battles with tons of different mechanics to deal with, complex ability systems, many places to explore, and so on. And now the game is coming to Nintendo Switch. But the question is whether this is a worthy sequel to Trails from Zero, which was released a while ago. So let's dive into this massive adventure and see what it's all about. First, a word of caution whether you should play this game or not. Trails of Azure is part of a larger series and is a direct sequel to Trails of Zero, which are both part of the Crossbell arc. But at the same time, you have to put it in a broader context and include games in the Steel series, which are also linked to Zero, Azure and Trails from the Sky. But if you still want to play this game without having made it through any predecessor, the game offers a text-based walkthrough that explains previous events. But honestly, I can highly recommend playing through the previous games instead of getting a quick update. But there is a problem. Not all games are available for Nintendo Switch, where some editions are only available for PC and PlayStation. However, the direct predecessor Trails from Zero is available for purchase, which could possibly serve as a good introduction to the series. The story is about the political turmoil that surrounds the town of Crossbell, a centrally located city where conflicts of interest make the future uncertain for citizens. But in the middle of all the mess stands Lloyd Bannings, a detective who now works for SSS, Special Support Section. His gang include Noel Seeker, Wazzy Hemisphere, Ellie McDowell, Theo Plato and Randy Orlando. Their main task is to help the city's residents when they have been exposed to various types of crime. Their jobs can be anything from finding a stray cat to kill monsters or surveillance work. But even though it may seem clear who the game's protagonists are, there are so many factions, groupings, organizations and kingdoms that in different ways play a decisive role in the game's story development. And believe me, it can be an advantage to read about all the characters in order not to lose yourself in the story. The reason is that much can be perceived as very grey. It's not entirely clear who is power hungry, who wants to do good, or who is downright crazy. But the game's developer, Falcom, has certainly spared no expense when it comes to creating a broad narrative from all its aspects. Basically, there are backstories for all the important characters in the game, and there are quite a few actually. But to name a few, this is Gileath Osborne, a representative of the Imperial government who can be perceived with dubious intentions. Or the mayor of Crossbell, Dieter Kroa, a person with power who may appear to be a nice person on the surface. But is he really? But after all, there are many characters in the game who in different ways play a decisive role in the fate of Crossbell. But for me personally, it took quite a while before I became invested in the game's plot. A bit into the game, a conference is held where presidents and representatives from monarchies meet to discuss Crossbell's future. This is also when you seriously begin to understand how the elite positions themselves. And that's how the story is in this game, alternating. Sometimes it feels uninspired and you wonder why you should bother looking for a lost umbrella, for example, which is offset by missions that are really exciting and nerve-wracking. For example, when the big questions have to be answered, the struggle between nations and their different ideologies. So let's start by discussing the quests. Most often you get a couple of different missions at the same time, which are divided into two parts, the main missions and the side missions. The side quests can be described in broad terms as adding color to the game, where you interact with random characters and have to solve various minor problems. Like this mission where you have to stop some speeders by placing sandbags, or here where you have to run through half a city to find a lost cat. It might not sound like the most epic of quests where you slay huge bosses or change the world, but sometimes it's the little things that make the big difference. By completing all these missions you get a good picture of what is going on in the city, but also feeling that this is a vital adventure that feels captivating. This is far from a sterile experience. The main missions are usually the opposite. Here the tasks that lead the game forward are carried out. Sometimes the conclusions are of epic proportions where, among other things, you open up new areas and experience dramatic events. Some missions include taking down monsters, which is done through turn-based battles. Most often you have 4 heroes at your disposal, backed up by a support. Basically we recognized this from before. but there are some things that make everything a little different. Each character has their normal attack, but can also use arts and special craft spells. By analyzing the enemy's weaknesses, you can find out what kind of elemental attack to use to be as effective as possible. It's either about earth, water, fire, wind, time, space or mirage attacks. Although these abilities can be quite effective, the craft attacks are the most entertaining in my opinion. With these special attacks, you always see a cool animation, which means that some enemies will take a real beating. But not always. It's kind of funny when you use a craft attack, see the animation and deal out minimal damage. Ridiculous. But as a whole, the battle system is a mix of the most typical aspects of turn-based battles, but here put in a different light. You can also move your troops to avoid enemy attacks, which is another thing to take into consideration. So the battles can turn out to be complex, but at the same time they can offer an entertaining gameplay depending on all the choices. And speaking of choices, each character can have their own abilities which are seen under the Orbments tab. When we click on it, two options appear, Quartz and Arts. Quartz is basically a collection of passive abilities that make each character stronger. For example, more health or the ability to move further in battle. The Arts tab is directly linked to all the abilities you use in battle, everything from various healing abilities to offensive abilities. And let me say this, there is a sea of different abilities to choose from and can mean that a lot of time must be spent testing what you like to use. I found it felt overwhelming with all the choices and would have preferred there to be some limitations. But now, on the contrary, you have a lot to play with, which in itself is not wrong, but I just want to point out that all the abilities that can be used are very extensive. The control works very well whether you're in combat or running around exploring. I don't want to claim that this is a game that relies on a responsive control. Really, it's not that kind of game. But despite that, the control is very easy to use, regardless of where you are or what you're doing. What is worth mentioning is that the game has a speed feature that can be very useful, especially useful if you're out in the field and want to kill enemies quickly and easily for XP. Just look at this. I'm moving from fight to fight and all I have to do is hold down the A button to get through the fights. Maybe it's a manipulative way to play, but it works quite well if you want to get quick XP. But the speed function is also effective when running around Crossbell. It's a fairly large place and you often have to carry out various things all over the city. Then the speed function is very handy to have available. When it comes to the visuals, I have to say that the developers did a fantastic job creating so many vivid environments. It is a wealth of detail that makes most places come alive, especially in the cities or in places that include some form of civilization. However, some caves feel like a dull contrast that sometimes gives a relatively empty impression, like you're mostly running around in a colorless dungeon slaughtering enemies, but this underground world stands out in my opinion. It gives a more futuristic impression where the combination of steel, concrete and water creates a stylish setting. But if there's something that really stands out in this game, it's all the little cutscenes where the camera moves across different views. It usually gives a picture of where you are and helps set a tone of what to expect. I really enjoy these little animations, a nice spice to the whole. You can also equip your characters with weapons, jackets, shoes and accessories, but as far as I can tell, nothing affects how the heroes look visually, except for the weapons that are seen in battle. But the armors and weapons usually come with stats needed to make your character stronger. We are of course talking about the classic stats such as strength, dexterity and speed, but there are also many other parameters that can be found on the equipment you use. Trails of Azure is a very large game that if played to its fullest requires many hours, probably several days. There is so much to explore, so many things to master and learn, and that's exactly what the game is, a learning curve. Regardless of whether you're a beginner or an expert, I assume that most people could be challenged because there are different degrees of difficulty. The game also runs very well. I haven't experienced a single crash and rarely see the game suffering from frame rate issues. Overall, this is a solid game. I can really recommend this game, but at the same time there is a relevance to wait if you haven't played previous games in the series, because many dialogues are based on previous events. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. I review new games every week. Have a good day, see ya!